All right, we're going to begin part 2 of the chapter 4 and 5 lecture today over heredity and the inheritance and variation of traits. So we ended off last time talking about the number of chromosomes that humans have. Remember that humans have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and 22 of those have to do with like our physical traits, what we look like, how tall we're going to grow, all of those types of things. And then the last pair is the sex cells or the sex chromosomes. You get one from mom and one from dad. So each of our chromosome pairs, one of the pair came from mom, the other one came from your dad. So during mitosis, when cells divide, those 23 pairs are just copied. So every single cell has 23 pairs. Every single cell has 46 chromosomes. But during meiosis, there are no pairs. During meiosis or meiosis, each of these pairs is halved, and you only get half of them. A lot of times when cells are reproducing, mutations or like an error will happen. Basically, when your cells are being reproduced, it's like your DNA is being read and then made a copy. It's like somebody is copying down a vocab word. Well, sometimes there can be an error in the reading. Sometimes we will read over a word so many times, and maybe one of the times that we're reading it by accident, we say the wrong word. We say the, and then we might read over it and say it on accident. It's just because we're going so fast and we're so used to it that we make errors. Well, the same thing happens when our cells are reproducing. Sometimes they make an error, and this is called a mutation. This is where there's been an alteration in the DNA sequence that makes up the gene. So during meiosis, when the chromosomes and the DNA is being read or being separated, sometimes it won't separate correctly. So mutation can happen when there's like a misread DNA in the protein. For instance, in this particular chromosome set, chromosome number 21 has 3. So that means in either the mom or the dad's cells, when they were splitting and they were halving the pairs, the pair on 21 did not get halved. So that offspring inherited 3 sets instead of 2 of number 21. Now, this is actually a very common disease that we see, and it's trisomy 21 or Down syndrome. So in a Down syndrome child or person, they have 3 chromosomes for number 21 instead of 2, like the rest of us. Your DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is basically like the blueprint for your life or for building your proteins that build everything about you. DNA is self-replicating. That means it's able to make a copy of itself. All living things have DNA. The difference between a virus and a bacteria, remember that viruses are not alive. Viruses do not contain DNA. They have RNA. So DNA is in all living things. It's what basically tells us the identity of that item. It's the main component in chromosomes. Basically, your chromosome is a really tight strand of DNA that's been wound together into a chromosome. DNA is what carries all your genetic information. It's what makes you who you are. It's basically like the letters to your story or who you are. It's double helixed. So that's what this shape is here. It's a double helix. So basically you have your typical animal or plant cell. Inside the cell is the nucleus. Inside the nucleus are the chromosomes. Inside a chromosome is the DNA. Genes are your genetic information. The genes are like the specific things on the DNA that tell the organism what to become or what to look like. So this is the unit of heredity that's passed from the parent to the offspring. It determines all of your characteristics. Now, the word genotype actually means what material, what genetic information is there. Phenotype is what it looks like. So genotype is the genes, phenotype is the physical trait. It's what you actually look like. Here just kind of shows you like that they're like, here's the genetic information for a fruit fly. And each section on the DNA gives a different characteristic. So it tells you exactly what is happening. So like this first section would give antennas. This second section has to do with the way that the wings look, like wrinkled or not wrinkled. So each section gives a different characteristic for the organism. Dominant traits are what's going to show up. So no matter what, if you have the dominant trait, then that is what you're going to physically see. Recessive traits are ones that can be hidden. So for instance, my mom and dad both have brown eyes. Well, every one of their children have blue eyes. Well, that's because brown eyes are dominant. So my mom and dad both have the brown eye gene. But they also had a blue eye gene that didn't show up, but it does show up in their children because they gave all of their kids the blue eye gene. So dominant means it's going to show up if it's there. Recessive means that it only shows up if you got one from mom and from dad. So the only way that we could have all had blue eyes was because our mom gave us a little B for blue eyes, and so did our dad. A monohybrid cross. This is where you're looking at the genetic information for only one thing. So for instance, here is eye color. So this would be kind of like if one parent had brown eyes, but they were a carrier for a blue eye gene, the other parent just had brown eyes. So all of the children would end up with brown eyes. But a monohybrid cross is basically just showing you, it's a way for you to look at what happened with the genetics on like paper, basically. Gregor Mendel was an Austrian monk. He's who we give credit for being the father of genetics, and he studied pea plants. And he basically looked at the different color of pea plants, and he raised like a full set of just purple pea plants. Well, over time, he would see that white pea plants would start showing up. And that was because there was a white or a little b gene in his plants. A Punnett square is basically the way that we show or we can predict what something is going to look like. You give the dominant allele a capital letter, so the capital A would be dominant, and the recessive gets a lowercase letter. If you're carrying out a dihybrid cross, we'll talk a little bit more about this when we actually get to work some out. But a dihybrid cross is crossing two different things. So it's showing like two traits. So in this case, it was showing like a short tail, and it was showing like tail and color. So what is the tail shape and what is the color of the coat? So dihybrid means two. They're crossing two individuals that have two different traits. Asexual reproduction. The main thing that you need to know is if there's only one parent, then that means the offspring is going to be genetically identical. You don't have any changes if there's no new DNA introduced into the system. And so asexual reproduction means that the parent and the offspring are going to have the exact same DNA. There's going to be nothing different. In sexual reproduction, there will be some differences because there's two parents. So each parent is going to contribute half of its genetic material. And so the individuals are going to have one chromosome from one parent and one chromosome from the other parent. Okay, so that's the end of our notes for this section. Once you get them all typed out, you can go ahead and get them turned in. Thanks.